Hi everyone, I'm Quadra and this is the Blades of Gixa video update number 344. In this update we'll be talking about this spread, which is the first level of the mega dungeon, the Blades of Gixa. For anyone coming to this fresh, the Blades of Gixa is a mega dungeon for tabletop RPGs. It's basically a big, mostly underground setting for playing role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, or Knave, or Shadowdark, or Cairn, or whatever you like. I created the Blades of Gixa over the course of 2023 as part of Dungeon 23, which was a challenge put out by Sean McCoy. The challenge was to draw one dungeon room every day for the entire year. I did this, more or less, starting with January 1st and working my way through every day of the year. Each spread is a month, all the way to December 31st. And then I went back over all the stuff that I'd made and tried to figure out how it all fit together into a kind of history. That's this spread. I made a page about the general information about the world. I made an overworld spread, which covers the town and the island that sits above the mega dungeon. Now that I have a better idea of the structure and history and characters and motivations and so on of this place, I'm going back through all of these spreads to clean up and flesh out what I had previously just kind of made up as I went along. When this is all done, the Blades of Gixa will be published as a book, a set of art print posters. It'll also come with an amazing soundtrack by the very talented Galen Drew, who also created the soundtrack for my previous project, Warped Beyond Recognition. You can pre-order the Blades of Gixa at paradiso.ooo/Gixa. Now let's get into this update. Here, we're looking at the first level of the dungeon, the Ancient Baths of St. Orvis, or the Cult of Gixa. These are the ruins of a once famous bathhouse that sits beneath the town of Baintok. Here. There are numerous entrances into the dungeon. We have a crevice, we have a chimney, a waterfall into a cave, a hidden ladder, an overgrown entrance, 2 rivers flow out from underground, fissures in the cliff, and some other more hidden ones. So one thing you'll notice right off the bat on this spread is there's a lot of stuff that's pasted onto these pages. I've accumulated a lot of scrap paper from doing this. All of this paper has this 2mm grid on it, which I use as a guide for my writing. A decent amount of the original writing has survived, but a lot of it was pretty messy or needed to be reworked in some way, and in some cases I could do that with correction fluid, but other larger edits required me to use separate pieces of paper for this. A consequence of this is that these pages have gotten a little messier looking, and also the original grid of the calendar has become a bit less apparent. But in the final versions of the book and posters, the grid will be printed in a contrast color, so the calendar grid and the art will coexist nicely. I'll make some additional use of color to help make these pages more readable. So what's new on these pages? For starters, when I first created this level, I had no idea what this whole thing was going to become. I actually had no intention of even printing it. All of that came later. But coming back to this, after having created the dungeon and much of its history, I had a much better idea of the context for this level. In particular, I knew I wanted to have a few legends about this area. So over here in the upper left, we have 2 legends about the baths. Baintok's Baths legend, Baintok being the town above, which is mostly dominated by humans and halflings. It goes like this. In ancient times, the waters of Lake Baina carved caves through this land and sustained Baintok, then a small farming village. But one fateful year, the kobold wizard Nefari led his clan out of the depths of the world and took control of the caves, befouling the waters with evil magics, sickening Baintok's people and ruining their crops. Orvis, their priest, prayed to Jormungandr for guidance. The sky serpent imbued Orvis with great power, and in some tellings sent 2 or 3 angels, the lost sisters, to assist him. Orvis battled Nefari and smote him, then performed a great miracle, imbuing the cave's waters with magical healing properties. The remaining kobolds thanked Orvis, and promised to forever tend to the caves in his honor, and to protect the waters for Baintok. Satisfied, Orvis descended below the baths to seek out and destroy other evils, like their former master. He and the lost sisters were never seen again. And then we have the Kobolds' Baths legend. Kobolds had always lived in the caves, fed by the lake's waters, but one fateful year, an evil human wizard, Curzin, came to the caves and used his magic to enslave kobolds and force them to dig catacombs beneath the caves for his diabolical experiments. The kobolds resisted, but the wizard was too powerful for them alone. So the elders sent a brave young kobold, Kagitsi, to the surface to find help. There he pled his case to a trio of goddesses, Gixa and her sisters, who were visiting a priest in a nearby human village. Gixa and Doruk were especially moved by the young kobold, and they all followed him back and fought together to banish Curzon and free the kobolds, pursuing the wizard to the depths. None were ever seen again. So we have two legends, which have some similarities, but also some stark differences. The legend told in Baintok puts Orvis front and center, this human priest, who they have a statue of, and who has kind of become their patron saint. And he's very much tied to the power of Jormungandr, the great sky serpent and chief god of the overworld. In some versions of the story, there are 2 or 3 angels, the lost sisters, who are sent by Jormungandr to assist Orvis in his cleansing of the caves. They also emphasize that Nefari, this wizard, was a kobold and the leader of a kobold clan. Meanwhile, the kobolds say, no, we've always lived here. There was an evil wizard, but it was a human wizard named Curzon, and he enslaved the kobolds. He was not their leader. Their story really puts the emphasis on Kagitsi, who was one of their own, and Gixa and Doruk, 2 of the sisters, who they saw as goddesses. Orvis and Baintok are mentioned, but not by name. The sisters were visiting a priest in a nearby human village. Right? So what's important about each of these stories is a bit different. So here we have a little bit about the truth. There is some truth to both legends, but the wizard enslaving the kobolds was Zurzan Nefri, a cave elf noble who retreated to his family's manse on level 6 after his defeat by Gixa, Doruk, Sarkasha, Orvis, and Kagitsi, also known as Fireheart. So a significant part of the later dungeon deals with the cave elves, a long-lost group of elves that live deep underground. So then we have a bit of history. Humans and kobolds built out the caves into a beautiful bathhouse, attracting pilgrims seeking healing from far and wide. The kobolds lived in and maintained the baths and catacombs below as temples to Gixa and Doruk, respectively, even as the church above, that's the Jormungandr church, canonized Orvis and spread his legend. This difference has long been a wedge between Baintok and the kobolds of the baths, but their interdependence and mutual prosperity usually smoothed things over. This ended in the Age of Sorrows, when the baths and legends surrounding them were largely forgotten in the wars for the shrinking lands. Pilgrims stopped coming, Baintok shrank, and the baths fell into disrepair. And here we have references to different time periods, which are back here. So that's all ancient history. What's been going on a bit more recently, the House of Bane, which is the ruling house of Baintok and the Isle of Montiri, has isolated the kobolds of the Baths, which is a faction of kobolds, the descendants of the kobolds from the legends. The House of Bane has isolated them and attempted to control their movement in and out of the Baths using the Montiri Guard, and this continues to this day. The Temple of Jormungandr, which is another faction on the surface, supports this, as it views the kobolds' veneration of Gixa and Doruk as heretical, and they see it this way because the kobolds do not really venerate Jormungandr, who, according to the temple's doctrine, must be held above all other deities. Over the long drowning, the kobolds dwindled and ceded most of the baths to wildlife and bandits, retreating to the tents of Makruk, which is right here. Makruk, kobold tent village. Sopor has long been a vice among the kobolds, but in recent months, Makruk has been flooded with it. A quarter of its residents are now addicted. Sopor is an addictive drug, which has some very unusual properties, which comes from deeper in the dungeon, and which we'll get to in a later video. 12 smugglers, whose ship wrecked in Quarry Bay a week ago, have set up camp. That's over here. Parvin, a young adventurer, stole a key from Akka, but died before he could use it. He's over here, getting eaten by corpse eels. And the AEB, the Admiralty Evidence Bureau faction, have been secretly recruiting informants in Makruk and working with Kredig and Orek to move Sopor. So the AEB is this sort of shady branch of the Admiralty, which controls basically the entire surface world. and they have informants among the kobolds, and they've been working with 2 kobolds in particular, one of whom is Orek, who lives on this level, and the other is Kredig, who lives a level down. Now, the single most significant area of this floor of the dungeon is Makruk, the kobold tent village. This is the home of the kobolds of the Baths, which is one of the major factions. They're not terribly powerful, but they are significant, at least on this level. Makruk has a population of about 80 kobolds, 3 halflings, and 2 humans. It has a council of elders that meet in a domed tent. Worship of Gixa, Doruch, and Kagitsi is prevalent. They have kobold scouts, who are sort of an elite group, and they guard the village, patrol the baths, and make nighttime sorties to the surface to scavenge and steal food and supplies. Makruk is poverty-stricken, but it has a strong tradition of hospitality. After all, they did used to run this bathhouse. And kobolds are kept from the surface from the Montieri Guard, and about 10% of them have sold info to the Admiralty Evidence Bureau. Over here we have the Makruk docks, which will have up to 3 rowboats, depending on when you come here. There's Billig's Ferry. Billig is a salty, chatty halfling who will row up to 3 people anywhere west of the falls. These are the falls here. So he won't go to the falls or east of the falls, but he'll take you anywhere else that the water will allow, for a price, of course. Kakal's wife. Kakal is a stoic fisher kobold and is usually out fishing. And Orek's dinghy, used by Orek for fishing and smuggling. Orek is, again, one of the kobolds that is working with the Admiralty Evidence Bureau to move these drugs. Kredig, son of the elder Aka, fled Makruk months ago after the scouts caught him moving lots of sopor. Honored dead, chosen by elders, are entombed in the crypt. It's right here. Others are ritually stripped of flesh, and their bones are taken through the crypt down to the next level, to 224. And then here we have a description of the 3 elders. We have Aka, who is kind but no fool. She wants her stolen key back, which is on this guy's body. She wants her son Kredig to return and make amends, and she wants an end to sopor. She will recruit help in putting an end to the sopor trade. Kobek is crafty and mean. He wants to be free of oppression by the House of Bane. He wants freedom for Makruk and the kobolds. He wants to restore kobold control of the baths and crypts. That's the next level down. And he wants to end kobold sopor use. He doesn't want to get rid of sopor. He just thinks that kobolds should be selling it to people outside of the baths. And finally, we have Rukbo, who is rambly and senile, and he just wants the good old days to return, whatever that means. Now, Orek is a kobold thief. He is amiable but brutal if crossed. He smuggles goods in his boat, which is described here, and he takes the goods on Orvo River, which is up this way, out through the Banewald to Quarry Bay, which is where smugglers will meet him and take the goods and ship them out from the island. Now, the crew, the smuggler crew over here who crashed their boat, they lost his last shipment with their boat. So he wants an example made of them. And there's another note here that he moves sopor for the Admiralty Evidence Bureau. And in fact, you can see here that Orek secretly moves sopor along the dotted route, and there is a dotted route here going from this sopor stash, secretly hidden behind a bookshelf, out on the water to here, one of the Gixan monk cells. This cell has a bunch of outlaws who are cutting and selling sopor through this secret passage into this sopor den, where a bunch of people, mostly kobolds, are getting stoned. Now, this is probably a good time to also talk about encounters. Up here, we have land encounters. So if you're on land, you'll roll here. You can encounter kobold scouts, wild dogs, outlaws, kids from Baintalk exploring, an Admiralty Evidence Bureau agent, or 2 of the above interacting. So you'd roll on this twice and you'd figure out how, say, some kids and some outlaws would be interacting. Might not be great for the kids. And then on the water, we have a D4 encounter table. You can encounter corpse eels, a great carp, a boat from the Makruk docks, or 2 of the above interacting. So that's any one of these 3 boats. This is the most likely way you'd encounter Kakol, but you might also encounter Orek or Billig that way. And if you encounter one of them plus the great carp or the corpse eels, maybe they're fishing or maybe they're fighting them off, and they could use your help, who knows. Now, Orek has a little stash over here. There's no sopor in there, but he's also just a thief and a grave robber and general ne'er-do-well. This stash is trapped. Some information about the trap. There's loot down here. There's a skull from this skull library below. And then Auric, if you're looking for him, there's a 50% chance he's gambling in the gambling den. So that could be a way to encounter him, but you might also interpret this to mean that, Auric might have a bit of a gambling problem, and this might be a way to get some leverage on him. Now, there's a bunch of other stuff in here. There's lots of secret doors. There's holes that go down to other levels. There's a giant sundew that will capture and eat people. There's an altar with the corpse of a fresh goat with its innards splayed out, and if one of the player characters can read omens, then they could do that to learn of a god's death. Or they could talk to Gixa, the kobold sage, who actually cut open this goat and read the omen contained within. We've got the left hand of Gixa, which is a fountain with healing waters, and we also have the right hand of Gixa, more hidden away, which is a fountain that will put you to sleep, maybe permanently. Gixa is revered as a goddess of life and death. What else do we have? There's a giant carp guarding its eggs. There's a brimstone blob. There's a storeroom full of candles. So here we have this sarcophagus, which is stone. It's hot to the touch. Kagitsi is carved into the sides with scenes from the Kobold's Bath legend. Inside the sarcophagus is a 1-to-1 stone statue of Fireheart, the kobold from the legend, inlaid with 2,000 coins worth of gold. This is a symbolic burial of a lost hero, because he went down into the depths below the baths and was never seen again, so they could never bury him for real, and the statue is magical. As long as it's kept hot, that heat will be transferred to all of the heated elements of the baths, the hot bath and all of these grates. If you move the sarcophagus, you'll find underneath it is a shaft going down to here, 211, which is this hot tar pit, which radiates this intense heat, which heats the sarcophagus and the statue inside. This, in turn, is heated by this eternal flame down below, which I'll flesh out in the future. So there will also be a spread of tables, which are referenced in various places here, like these scented candles. There will be a scent table that you can roll on. There will be several treasure tables for the different levels of the dungeon. So various keys here reference treasures. Now the stat blocks here are fairly simple. I only give a few relevant stats, which should be enough to get an idea of the creatures involved, but you may have to do a little bit of conversion for your system of choice. But as a general rule, I'm assuming that you'll be using hit dice, armor class, morale, and movement speeds. I always specify hit dice and armor class, but I don't always specify the other stuff if it's similar to normal human or is nothing special. So yeah, that's the general overview of this level. I have scanned these pages and I'm now working on cleaning them up. You can see that here. Don't worry that as I'm editing this, I make it black and white. The lines will be in color when it's printed, but for the purposes of cleaning up the art, it helps to just crunch everything down to a single channel, to black and white. Instead of having red, green, and blue channels, it's just easier to work with this way, and then I'll be adding color back in once all of this is cleaned up and laid out. Revising and keying these pages is a pretty long and arduous process, and then cleaning them up on the computer is another pretty time-consuming and arduous process. This whole thing is a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun, and I'm happy to be doing it. And I want to thank everyone who backed the Kickstarter, and also everyone who has pre-ordered the book and posters. You can still do this. Pre-orders are still available at paradiso.oo/Gixa. And finally, a huge thank you to all of the wonderful people who have become Paradiso members, who contribute to my work on a monthly or annual basis. You help me keep making stuff like this, and all of my other projects, the crafting videos, the RPGs, the software. Thank you so much. I recently created an RPG called Ratfuck, which is available to all paying subscribers. If you become a paying subscriber, you'll get it immediately. It will also become available soon for purchase on DriveThruRPG and itch.io. Finally, if you're interested in creating your own newsletter or blog or combination newsletter and blog, I recommend the excellent open source non-venture-backed tool called Ghost, which is what I use to run my website and newsletter, blog, all that fun stuff. If you go to paradiso.oo/ghost, that's an affiliate link. If you sign up for their hosting service at no extra cost to you, I will get a little cut of your subscription, and that would help me a whole lot. Yeah, I think that's it. So I'll be working on the rest of the spreads for the dungeon, treasure tables, other tables, faction pages, and other stuff. There's a lot going into this. But yeah, I'll keep you updated, and until next time, thanks a lot. Bye.